A tidy August garden can be a warning sign. The soil is freshly loosened. The hose comes out twice a day. Every yellow leaf disappears, and the fertilizer bottle gets another turn. It feels responsible. I used to finish those Saturday rounds sweaty and satisfied, certain I had helped. Some of that work pushes a vegetable garden in the wrong direction. The chore gives you instant proof that you did something, while the plant pays for it later. There are 8 August habits like that, the kind that feel responsible while quietly cutting into your yield. Keep an eye on the pruning habit near the end. A pair of shears can make a tomato plant look perfect in minutes while taking away more than you intended. Number 1. Weekly tilling. You're severing the network feeding your roots. You know the Saturday when you grab the hand cultivator and loosen up the soil around your tomatoes because loose soil feels like healthy soil? You work the blade around the stem in a slow circle, turn over the top few inches, and step back satisfied. The bed looks tended. It looks like you did something. Here's the part that changes everything. That loosening just tore through a network you never see. Thin white threads called mycorrhizal fungi wrapped around your tomato roots, reaching out into the soil for water and nutrients your roots alone could never find on their own. That web lives mostly in the top few inches of ground, which happens to be exactly the depth your cultivator just plowed through. Here's what's actually happening underground. The fungus and the root run something like a trade. Roots hand over sugar. Fungus hands back water and phosphorus pulled from soil your roots could never reach alone. Cut those threads and the trade stops cold. Your plant goes back to feeding itself through roots that cover a fraction of the ground the fungal network did. Rebuilding those threads takes weeks, not days, not one afternoon with a garden hose. A weekly cultivator habit never gives the network a chance to grow back before you slice through it again. The roots underneath your tomatoes never get past square one, all summer long. If there's one habit on this list worth breaking first, this is it. Here's the number that actually matters. Till once, at the start of the season, to break up compacted ground before you plant. After that, the cultivator goes back in the shed. Lay 2 to 3 inches of mulch around your plants instead. Mulch smothers weeds the same way tilling does, minus the damage happening underneath your feet. One exception worth knowing. Brand new beds still need that first pass to break up hard, compacted ground, and young transplants need loosened soil right at planting time. Past that point, leave it alone. The dirt doesn't need loosening. It needs to be left alone. Number 2. Crowded seedlings. Every extra plant is stealing from the rest. This happens in nearly every backyard the same way. Seeds come up thick, and pulling out the healthy extras feels like throwing away free plants. If you've been leaving every seedling in the row because pulling healthy ones feels wasteful, that's the habit costing you. I let a whole flat of seedlings crowd like that once, telling myself I would thin them out later. What the how-to guides never mention? Those seedlings are already competing before you notice a problem. Light, water, root space, split among plants that would rather have it all to themselves. The reason comes down to something simple. Crowded seedlings stretch thin and leggy reaching for light instead of building strong roots. Pack them together and you trap damp, still air at the base of the stems, and that's exactly where fungal disease gets its start. The timing is exact here, not a guess. Thin once the first true leaves show, before roots have a chance to tangle underground. Wait past that point, and pulling one seedling drags its neighbor out with it. This doesn't apply if you're doing intensive succession planting with spacing already worked out, or growing something like baby greens on purpose, thick for an early cut. Not complicated, just overlooked. Number 3. Weekly feeding. The plant wasn't hungry, it was confused. Right now, in your garden, this might be happening. A pepper plant droops a little in the afternoon heat, so out comes the fertilizer scoop. Again. I used to reach for that bottle without thinking twice, every time a leaf looked tired. The detail every checklist skips. Your plant isn't asking for more food. It has plenty. It's just using every bit of it in the wrong direction. Something specific is happening at the root level. Nitrogen is a green light for leaf growth. Feed a plant nitrogen every week and it takes that signal and runs with it, pushing out leaf after leaf, stem after stem. Flowering and fruiting take a back seat because as far as the plant knows, growing bigger is still the job. You end up with a jungle of leaves and a handful of blossoms that drop before they ever set fruit. There's a second cost too. Fertilizer carries salt, and feed a plant too often and that salt builds up around the roots faster than rain or a hose can wash it out, scorching the very roots you're trying to feed. Down to the specifics now. Hold off on the weekly feeding. Once flowers show up, switch to something lighter on nitrogen and heavier on phosphorus and potassium, the nutrients that push a plant toward fruit instead of foliage. One thing worth knowing, if a soil test says your ground is genuinely low on nutrients, that's a different problem, and it needs feeding. Just not the weekly kind out of habit. The plant wasn't hungry, it was confused. Number 4. Watering twice a day. Your roots are drowning, not thirsty. You've stood over this exact bed before. Hose in hand at 6 in the morning. Hose in hand again at 6 that evening, because 2 waterings a day feels like double the insurance. I ran that exact routine one record-breaking hot summer. Sure, I was saving my tomatoes from the heat. Watered them at sunrise, watered them again before dinner, every single day for weeks straight. The leaves still went yellow and droopy anyway. I figured they needed even more water, so I gave them more. By August, I finally pulled one plant to check underneath, and the roots came up black and mushy in my hand, smelling like a swamp instead of dirt. I stood there in the heat realizing all that extra effort had been drowning the plant the whole time. You've probably done some version of this yourself, watering harder the moment things start to look bad. Nobody puts this in the how-to guides. Your tomato roots need air just as much as they need water. This is biology, not bad luck. Down in the root zone, the soil isn't solid. It's laced with tiny gaps that hold both water and oxygen. Soil that stays soaked for too long floods those gaps and pushes the oxygen right out. Starved of air, roots stop functioning the way they should. Then they weaken, then they rot. Here's the part that keeps this habit alive year after year. A waterlogged plant droops and yellows in almost the exact same way a thirsty one does. So you see wilting leaves, you assume drought, and you reach for the hose again. Once you see that, the rest makes sense. More water was never the answer. Air was the missing piece the whole time. This is where the guessing stops. Push a finger 2 inches into the soil right next to the stem. Still damp down there? Skip watering. Full stop, no exceptions. Water deeply once or twice a week instead of lightly twice a day, and let the top layer of soil actually dry out some between soakings. Deep, infrequent watering pulls roots down after the moisture, building a stronger root system as the season goes on. Shallow, frequent watering keeps roots stuck near the surface, exactly where they drown fastest and where they're most exposed when the ground finally does dry out. Young seedlings still need the surface kept moist for their first week or two after sprouting, and containers drain fast enough that they may need more frequent watering than a garden bed does. That's what changes it. If that finger test just saved you from watering on autopilot for the rest of the summer, hit subscribe and turn on the bell. YouTube will let you know the moment the next one drops. Number 5. Calendar spraying. You're killing your garden's free protection. This is the moment things quietly go wrong. No bugs in sight anywhere, but Sunday is spray day, so out comes the bottle anyway. If Sunday has become spray day regardless of what's actually crawling on your plants, that's the habit working against you. This never makes it past the headline. That spray doesn't know the difference between a pest and a friend. Broad-spectrum insecticide kills the aphid chewing your kale and the ladybug that eats 40 aphids a day just the same. Bees, ladybugs, tiny parasitic wasps. They're all the unpaid security detail patrolling your garden for free. And a calendar spray schedule wipes them out right alongside whatever you were actually trying to kill. That is free pest control. Here's what nobody's connecting. Spray on a schedule for 2 seasons straight, and that security detail doesn't come back the following year. Without them, the next generation of pests moves in with nothing left to hold them in check, so you end up spraying even more than you did before you started. Checking first and spraying only when there's a real problem uses noticeably less chemical overall, for the same harvest or better. I sprayed on a timer for 2 summers before I noticed my own bee count had dropped to almost nothing. The exact amount looks like this. Walk the garden once a week and actually look. Holes in leaves, eggs on the undersides, insects you can see. Only then reach for anything. A strong blast of water or a squirt of soap knocks most soft-bodied pests off before you ever need the bottle. This doesn't apply once a real outbreak has taken hold and is spreading fast. That calls for treating it properly, not skipping the spray altogether. Small habit, big result. Number 6. Cutting across the bed. One shortcut compacts soil by 75%. You've done this, probably without a second thought. Cut straight across the bed to grab a tomato instead of walking the long way around. Half a dozen steps saved. Easy trade. I did that exact thing all last season. Cutting diagonally across my tomato row every time a ripe one caught my eye near the back, sometimes a dozen times in a single afternoon of picking. I've walked both ways through that same bed, and the difference isn't close. The piece that usually gets buried entirely? Every one of those shortcuts leaves a footprint underground that outlasts the season. Healthy soil holds its shape like a sponge, packed with tiny gaps that hold the air and water your roots actually live on. This is the part science explains better than habit. Each step you take presses those gaps flatter, squeezing the air right out from between the soil particles. One pass across damp ground can compact it about 75%. A few more trips over that same spot and you're pushing 90. It doesn't take a season of heavy foot traffic to get there. It takes a handful of Saturdays spent taking the short way. Compacted ground turns hard enough that roots can't push through it, and water just runs off the top instead of soaking down where it's needed. Your plants can look fed, watered and mulched perfectly, and still come up stunted. Because the real problem is sitting under your boots, not anywhere on your to-do list. It builds up slowly enough that you never see it happening in the moment. Specifics beat guesswork here. Lay one board or a line of flat stepping stones down the center of the bed as a fixed path. And step only on that, every single time. Even when a ripe tomato is sitting 3 feet off to the side. This doesn't apply to raised beds under 4 feet wide, built to be worked from every side without anyone ever stepping inside them. That's the takeaway. But the next habit on this list is the one that surprised me the most. And it's not about doing less. It's about a pair of pruning shears doing more harm than the weather ever did. Number 7. Pruning every sucker, the tidy habit that cuts your harvest. It's a scene you'll recognize fast. Pruning shears in hand, snipping every sucker and every yellowing leaf off the tomato plant. Because a tidy plant feels like a productive plant. This is the one from the hook. Turns out it's doing the most damage of all 8. This is the part every guide quietly leaves out. Those leaves you're cutting off are the plant's entire energy factory. I used to think a tidy tomato plant was a healthy one, until I saw the numbers on what all that trimming actually costs. The mechanism is simpler than it sounds. Leaves capture sunlight and turn it into sugar, and that sugar is what fills out every tomato on the vine. Cut leaves, and you cut the plant's ability to make that sugar in the first place, no matter how neat the plant looks afterward. Every sucker you pinch off is a branch that could have flowered and fruited, gone before it ever got the chance. Every cut has a cost. A single missed sucker, left to grow, becomes its own small tomato plant riding on the same root system, adding fruit you'd never get otherwise. A study out of the Purdue Ag Center grew 14 tomato varieties 2 ways, pruned and left alone, side by side in matched pairs. The pruned plants lost up to 41% of their top-grade fruit. Fruit size went up 19%, but the plants also threw a third more culls. Fruit too small or misshapen to sell or serve. More cutting, less usable harvest, plant after plant, variety after variety. Trim too hard and the fruit loses its shade too, and it can scorch right on the vine in a hot week. That's precisely what this means for your yard. Only remove leaves that are actually diseased, brown spotted or clearly wilted, and leave at least 1 or 2 leaves above each flower cluster standing guard over the fruit. An old gardener I know, guy who has worked the same half-acre for 30 years, has never pinched a single sucker off a tomato plant in his life. His yard looks shaggy next to his neighbor's trimmed rows, vines sprawling everywhere, nothing tidy about it. His harvest has outpaced theirs every single year I've known him, and he's never once reached for the shears to explain why. This doesn't apply in a greenhouse or tight space where you need single-leader pruning to control height. And it doesn't apply if you're chasing the biggest single fruit rather than the biggest total harvest. The shears weren't helping, they were the problem. Number 8. Skipping the harvest walk. Every ripe bean left behind signals stop. Somewhere between the hose and the fertilizer bag, this starts. A whole Saturday spent staking, edging, deadheading, and the beans hanging heavy and forgotten at the back of the row. Here's what your effort is actually costing you. All that visible, satisfying work, staking, edging, pulling spent flowers off the marigolds by the fence, skips right past the one job that actually decides how much you harvest. Down at the cellular level, this is what's happening. A bean plant, a pepper plant, a zucchini vine. They're all running toward the same goal, getting seed inside a mature fruit. Once a pod or a pepper sits ripe on the plant long enough, the seed inside finishes developing, and the plant reads that as mission accomplished. It stops pushing out new flowers to replace it. Every ripe bean you leave hanging is a quiet signal telling the plant to slow down, and that signal adds up fast across a whole row. This is the paradox running under the whole list. Being busy in the garden was never the same as doing the one thing that actually grows the harvest. That is why picking matters. A woman who works 50 hours a week wrote to me about exactly this. Her weekends went to staking tomatoes and trimming the grass edge along her bean rows, work that made the whole yard look cared for from the porch. The beans kept ripening and hanging there untouched, day after busy day, week after week. She told me she couldn't pinpoint when the plants had quietly stopped flowering. Only that one week she noticed, and they just had. Get the number right, and the rest follows. Walk the harvest row for 5 minutes before you touch anything else in the garden. Pick first. Stake, edge, and tidy after, not before. This doesn't apply to one-and-done crops like winter squash or watermelon. Only to plants that keep fruiting all season if you keep picking. That's the shift. None of this was about being lazy. It was about being busy with the wrong things. Every habit on this list started from a good instinct: tilling, feeding, watering, tidying, and every one of them quietly worked against the harvest instead of for it. The energy was never missing. It was just aimed at the wrong job. One more thing before we wrap up. Before you do anything in the garden this week, ask one question. Would this plant miss it if I skipped it for 2 weeks? If the honest answer is no, that's your permission to skip it. So here's what to do next. This afternoon, put the cultivator away for good. Do the finger test instead, 2 inches down, next to the stem. If it's damp, walk past that plant today. Skip the tilling. Skip the second watering. Just check. Busy hands don't always mean a busy harvest. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for a plant is walk right past it.